Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered.
Brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Emily, and on this podcast, I bring you tips and tricks and different ideas into different aspects of travel. And today, I am going to talk about the basics of how to plan a trip. And I'm talking to you about this in the perspective and through the lens of someone who is very scatterbrained, and I hope by, talking about this today, I can maybe save you a little bit of trouble, because I have definitely made lots of mistakes in terms of planning, and so hopefully if you listen to this, I can help you avoid some of those. So, it's always the worst when you kind of slip up when you're planning and traveling. And it always just makes me feel terrible whenever I do. And so the goal is to kind of be able to have the most relaxing and easy trip possible. And so hopefully this should help you be able to accomplish something like that. And of course, as I mentioned, I am doing this in the lens of someone who is not an organized person. I'm not traditionally good with money. I'm not detail-oriented. I'm very easy and go with the flow when it comes to, making decisions in general. And this is something that has really carried me far in life. But it's carried me almost nowhere in terms of planning trips, and a lot of times I want to go on a trip and not have it very well planned. I think it's really nice to be able to just decide to go somewhere and kind of see where things take you, but you don't always have that option when you're on a tight budget or when you're in, a foreign country or something like that. And so I just want to talk to you about how to plan a trip from start to finish as sort of a type B personality. And just before we get started, I've been gone for the last few weeks because I've been under the weather, and as you can hear from my voice, I'm still getting there, but I wanted to come on and talk to you today, so you have to mind my voice. Okay, so first things first. Starting with the basics, you have got to choose your place that you would like to go. That's the first thing. Now, you literally have anywhere in the world you could go, but you have to choose your place based on how much time you have and then how much money you have to spend. And so how much you spend and how much time you have, this all is going to kind of go together when you're considering what you're looking for. And so, you kind of have to understand that going to South America takes a different kind of effort than going to Europe or on a road trip or a camping trip and so on and so forth. And so you really need to consider not only how much time you have and how much money you have, but kind of how you would like to allocate this time and this money. And also, things to consider, and something I like to consider if I really want to go traveling. Where do you have friends in the world? Where do you have friends in the country? Have you made friends in different places? Kind of planning your trip around opportunities is something that I have definitely benefited from. It's something that has saved me a lot of money. If you're going on a work trip, can you kind of squeeze in, a weekend of your own leisurely travels? Stuff like that can be a really good starting place when it feels overwhelming to begin to even try to plan a trip. These are usually the very first things that I consider, and that really helps me narrow it down. So, moving into the actual pre-planning, pre-trip aspect of this. You have to think, do you want to stay in a city? If you do you want to stay in a hostel, a hotel, an Airbnb, a mix of all of these things? Are you planning on going souvenir shopping, and what is that going to look like between Paris or India? Going to these different places, you have to kind of consider different prices and so on and so forth. And so once you planned what type of living and what type of travel you would like to do, then you would want to start to, vaguely plan the type of experience you would like to have. And then the next thing that goes along with that is the budget. And so that's when I start looking into more details. Number one is typically my stay. So on average, I probably spend at least an hour, and let's be honest, I spend multiple hours when I'm, searching on Airbnb, looking for the best price and then the best range. And if I'm staying in a city, these are some criteria that I always think about. Does it have a kitchen or a half kitchen? So can I cook and save money? Is it close enough to where I want to be so I'm not going to have to spend additional money on transportation? Or is it far away? Is there easy access to transportation to take you where you want to go? How many people can fit in it? How many people am I going to be traveling with? And will that be more expensive or less expensive for me? And then, of course, I want to go into other very specific planned accommodations, like if I'm going to be traveling for a long time, I would like there to be a washer and dryer, or to be in a close proximity to a washer and dryer, or a grocery store, things of that regard. Helping, like, these different types of accommodations can usually actually end up being a big part of your budget. And so if you can plan for this, if you can kind of almost like taking loopholes, as I like to say it in terms of travel, that's going to save you a lot of time, and that's going to save you a lot of money for the rest of your trip. And so kind of really, this is where, if we start really broad in terms of, okay, where do I want to go? How do I want to stay? How do I want to travel? We're kind of getting broader, and then that's when you can start to go in more, and that's when you're going to have a better idea of, what your budget is going to look like. And so once you've planned where you want to go, you've planned how you're going to get there. We want to look at flights. We're going to get to that. But you're going to look at, options for staying, and then you next are going to want to set, kind of more of a meal budget. Consider if you're going on a ski trip or a city where you'll be out all day or relaxing, or if you want to be on a relaxing getaway where you want to cook and relax and get takeout and have a much more loose set meal plan. So these are all really important things to consider when you're setting your budget for food. Consider this: different countries and different places and different cities have your money is going to carry differently. So I found a chart that ranked countries in price based on, which is, quote, inexpensive meals. So it ranked every country in terms of their inexpensive meals and how expensive and how cheap it was. So US is approximately $15 for dinner. Costa Rica, $7 for dinner, and then Switzerland was the most expensive country at an average of $25 for dinner in terms of inexpensive meals, which is obviously a relative term, but as you can see from this, different countries and different places carry different types of costs for food. And so the point is you want to just make sure that you are properly allocating money to set into your plan. This is going to help with your budget. This is going to help you stay on track, and this is going to help you stay more organized. Typically, I like to do the same amount of money every day for each meal, maybe with the exception of, the last night if I want to get a really nice meal. But I try to do something like, I buy $10 worth of breakfast groceries for the week. It's coffee, eggs, bacon, something really simple like that. And then maybe I say, $8 for lunch, $15 for dinner. Obviously, that's just an example. It's going to have to depend based on where you're going and what you're doing. If you're going on a camping trip, you're probably just going to buy, one set of groceries at the beginning, and you're all set. So again, that's just an example. So now we have the place we're going to go. We have the place we want to stay. We have looked into how much things are going to cost in terms of meals and pricing and groceries and so on and so forth. And again, we also would be doing flights, but I'm going to talk a little bit about that later in the episode. And so now we want to start to narrow that down and move on to our day-to-day itinerary. And we are going to talk about that right after we come back from the break. So stay tuned for us to talk about our day-to-day itinerary.
Do you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do? All these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
Talked about how to start to plan your trip when it can be an overwhelming experience. If you are not the most detail-oriented person, this is going to be a good guide for you to begin to start to plan that trip. So, as I mentioned before, we are going to talk about what your day-to-day itinerary is going to look like. Here are the things you need to consider. What do you want to do? Where do you want to go? You got to weigh your prices. You have to be efficient in terms of how you're going to plan your trip day to day. Do you want to be doing your busiest, most energizing tasks in the morning? Do you want to wait for the evening? Do you want to go out to dinner every night? Do you want to eat in every night? These are all things you have to consider. You want to look at doing your activities in proximity to each other. And so if you have two museums that are next door to each other, those are things you're going to want to hit in one day. And that is going to be a way to minimize transportation costs, which is both environmentally conscious and also just going to be a money saver and a time saver. You want to consider if something is going to tire you out. And again, like I said, if something's going to tire you out, maybe that's the only thing you do that day. Maybe you go shopping for the rest of the day, etc., etc. You really can be, as specific or vague as you want in terms of planning this. But what I would suggest to do is, get out, a sheet of paper or do this on your computer. And if you can just set for however many days you're going, a broad idea of what you would like to do that day, that is really going to help you stay on task. And that really helps me stay on task, especially financially, because that can be a problem for me a lot is, I haven't looked very far into, the cost of things, the price of things, how much it's going to cost me to get from point A to point B. And, these little things really do add up day to day. And so if you can take the time before to do that research, to say, okay, I want to go to, 4 museums while I'm here and I want to do them once every single day, which, would make the most sense to me because, I don't know who would want to go to, maybe you do want to go to 4 museums in one day. Maybe you're going for that specifically, but, you want to, plan smarter, you want to plan more efficiently, and these are going to be ways specifically that you can do that. Okay, so we are going to move on a little bit here into kind of what I call the pre-departure phase. So this is all the things that you're going to want to do right before you leave. Obviously, some of these are going to sound obvious, but I think they're good reminders. They're crucial, important things that can really, get in the way of or even ruin your trip if you don't do properly. First thing you want to do, square things away with your bank. If you are traveling, call your bank and tell them you are traveling. I can't tell you how many times I've had my credit card blocked or put on hold because I did not alert my bank. which they will do, and because they are trying to protect you against fraud, which is great, except if you are traveling in the middle of a country you've never been to, and all of a sudden you don't have any access to your money, that can be very difficult. So make sure you contact your bank, and then once again, make sure you have, 24-hour call service, international numbers, anything that you would need from your bank, in order to properly contact them or reach them while you are, traveling to the place you're going. If you're traveling to the next state over, you're probably going to be fine. But, if you're traveling across the country, across the world, these are things you're going to want to do. On that note, something that I like to do before I travel, and this is certainly not something you have to do, I like to take out cash. And if I'm traveling in country, I like to take out cash when I go on trips, because I think that helps me budget better, just seeing physical money. But if I'm going to a country with a different currency, I really like to take cash out in the US, which is, oftentimes an option. You're going to have to deal with, bank rates anyway. And I like to have this before I even get in country. That way, if I'm at the airport and I need a taxi ride, so on and so forth, that is one less thing that I have to worry about in country. Moving on, this seems so simple, but this is something I somehow forget to do. Make sure you clean out your refrigerator if you're going on a long trip. Make sure you get rid of trash. Make sure you turn your heat down. Make sure you turn your lights off. You know the drill. Just ways to, generally save money. You don't want to leave trash in your apartment, your one-bedroom apartment that will smell really bad when you come back. I've definitely made that mistake before. You want to make sure if you have dogs that they're going to be all set, water your plants, alert your office, shut your phone off. I really try to take the least amount with me from my home when I am going on vacation. So trying to kind of square away everything you need to do before you leave. That is going to just be a huge stress relief. If you're a student, try to, get your homework done, so on and so forth. I can't tell you how many times that I have told myself that I was going to, do my homework over vacation or read or do, certain work things that I need to do. And then all of a sudden it's the last day of the trip and I'm rushing to do it. And that is just not a position that you want to be in. And so make sure you kind of are able to square away all the things at home that you need to do. And then the last thing that I say, and this is something I've mentioned on previous episodes, make sure that people know where you're going. Make sure they have your itinerary just as a safety precaution. And then make sure that they have a copy. Someone trusted, and again, this has been in a previous episode that I've talked about. If you are going abroad, make sure that a very trusted person, your spouse, your loved one, your parents, your sister, your brother, has a copy of your bank statement and your passport, because sometimes that is information that you would not be able to access abroad, and that is something that if they have it, it's one quick call and they can give you that information that you really need. And then as we move into packing, which seems to be something that I talk about every single time I have an episode, but it's something that I care about. It's something that I feel like I am an expert in. This is maybe one of my biggest hacks that I've learned, and something that has really helped me along the way. If you are traveling with people, which I hope you're traveling with people, if you are traveling with people, if you're traveling with your friends, coordinate when you pack. Going on girls trips for me is the easiest way to pack, because if you just do you need 3 hairbrushes in your bag, or do you need 1? Do you need 4 blow dryers? Do you need all these different things? If you can share clothes, if you can share resources, if you can share shampoo and conditioner, that is going to eliminate a lot of space for you. It's going to be more economic, more sustainable, and just a generally just an easier way to do things, if you really think about it. I mean, as consumers, we like to have all of our own things all the time, but the more that you can share, in my opinion, the easier your trip is going to be. Toothpaste, stuff like that is really going to help you. And so moving on to the way that you're going to pack, obviously this is going to be different if you're taking a car, if you're taking a train, if you're taking a plane. All of these things are going to be, call for different packing things. Are you going to the mountains or going to the city, so on and so forth. And so you can check out pretty much any of my other podcasts that I've done for specific packing advice in terms of city or country or whatnot. But when we come back from the break, I'm going to talk to you about some specific details and facts that I have not talked about before on the podcast in terms of packing, and that is when we come back from the break.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Just in time to talk about some specifics in terms of packing. So I'm just going to walk you through kind of my first steps when I am packing and what I'm looking for, my criteria. And again, these are ways myself as a generally unorganized person can just try to stay on top of it, stay a little bit more organized, and, stay as neat as I possibly can. So the very first thing that I do when I am beginning to pack is I am going to check the weather. This is something I have not really talked about. This is something I cannot emphasize enough. You do not want to overestimate or underestimate the temperature when you are on your trip. I have made many mistakes in terms of packing and weather, and it is just a position that you do not want to be in. I can think of when I was 17 years old. It was the first time I was traveling without my parents, and I was going to London, and I just let this romantic idea of what London was going to be like really, really, really impact my decisions in terms of how I was packing to travel to London. And I had an idea that London would be significantly warmer than New England was in, I don't even know when I went. And I went in March or April or something like that. And I think I had this idea that it was going to be much warmer than it typically tends to be in New England. And I was very wrong. I was freezing the entire time. I ended up having to wear just every single layer that I brought every single day, and that is a mistake that I do not want to make again. I hate being cold. I hate being too hot. And so make sure you check the weather for the exact week that you are going, or if you cannot find the information, look up the temperature that the place that you were going was the year before at that time. That's, a pretty good guess. Look up if it rains a lot. Look up if, it can get really hot, if it's really sunny. Stuff like that is going to impact your wardrobe. So after I've checked the weather, I sit down, I look at my closet, and the first thing that I consider is, what am I going to be comfortable in? What do I want to wear? What are clothing that when I look at, I'm going to feel at home, I'm going to feel comforted, I'm going to feel like I want to be wearing it when I am, 500, 1,000, 2,000, 4,000 miles from my home. And, something else that I really need to consider, what is the culture? And I don't just mean this with, in terms of being culturally sensitive, like conservative. I mean, if I'm going to Boulder, Colorado, I'm going to dress and bring clothes very differently from if I was traveling to, Paris, France, or if I'm traveling to LA, that wardrobe is going to look really different than if I'm traveling to Chicago. And, for a lot of people, maybe they don't really care, and maybe you have, you wear the same clothes all the time, and that's completely fine. But I want to feel comfortable wherever I am traveling to. I want to feel like I fit in. I want to feel like I don't stand out necessarily as a tourist. I've talked about this concept before in terms of safety, in terms of being taken seriously. This is something that I really seriously consider when I'm traveling. And so once I kind of sparse out that, then I want to essentially create essentially a capsule wardrobe. And please let me know on Twitter or on Instagram or on Facebook if this is something that you would like me to talk about more in depth in terms of a capsule wardrobe. But just as a brief overview, a capsule wardrobe is something where every single piece that you have is specific. It has a specific purpose, and they all kind of go together, right? So if I'm bringing patterned tops, I want to bring plain bottoms, or vice versa. I typically tend to bring things that I can wear and rewear again. I talk about a rewear rate quite often. So I really want to specifically look at that when I am traveling. If you can plan your outfit for every day, if you can, even more, if you have your day-to-day itinerary already, that's going to make packing even more easily. If I know that I'm going to a church on Monday and a nightclub on Tuesday, and I'm going to walk around public gardens and, walk 10 miles on, Thursday, then I'm really going to be able to plan just day to day exactly what I'm going to wear. And that is something that makes me feel comfortable. That makes me feel like I've planned my trip properly. It's just going to make an easier, a more simpler, a more relaxed trip for you. And that is my whole plan. And that is my whole goal whenever I'm traveling. Okay, so moving on, once I've kind of, decided the type of clothes that I want, I've decided, where I'm going, what I'm going to want to be wearing, I really, really try from there to minimize the amount of clothing that I can take. So, I've pulled out pieces that I want, and what I try to do is, I heard this somewhere that, you should pack once and then put back half of the clothes that you've packed. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if I necessarily believe in that, but minimizing just the amount of, clothing, the amount of toiletries, so on and so forth, that you take is really going to help you if you are more of a scatterbrained person, if you are someone who is forgetful. The less that you bring, the less you can lose, which sounds kind of ridiculous, but I really do think it's true. And again, just trying to be conscious and minimal and very direct with the items that you're taking is going to help you stay more organized. It's gonna help you keep track of your items and keep track of the different things that you've brought. And so that is pretty much where I see with packing. I would love to know other people's packing tips and tricks if they have any, but that is really what I'm thinking about right before I leave when I am packing. Those are the criteria that I have. And so after the break, I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and I am going to try something new on this podcast. I am going to actively walk you through how I am currently planning one of my trips, and that is to go to Paris in March. And what I want to do is kind of talk to you step by step, the steps that I've taken so far, and then it being, 2 months in advance, I want to talk about the things that I'm doing right now to plan that trip, and that is going to be after the break.
Always on the go, but the day just won't be one without your Hollywood fix. Let Golden State Media Concepts Entertainment Podcast take care of that. Jordan and Keith is Entertainment Tonight meets Access Hollywood.
I'm Jordan. The guy laughing, that's Keith.
Yeah, I'm Keith.
An all-inclusive look of pop culture.
when we were back from our break. Before the break, I fully took you through what it is like to start to plan a trip when you are as scatterbrained and as type B as I am. And so now, just to kind of continue to walk everyone through that, I'm actually going to actively walk you through planning my trip to Paris in the springtime. Now, this is a trip. If you want to, you can copy this right out of this podcast. You can go on this trip and do it. Or if you want to, it can be a model for you as you start to plan different types of trips. And just for a basic idea of kind of how you can start to actually plan a trip for yourself. And so the first step for me, and something that I really enjoy doing, is planning super far ahead. So as I mentioned, this trip is coming up in March. I actually started planning, and I actually ended up purchasing my tickets way back in August. And so I knew the reason why I was able to buy trips in August is I knew that I would have a week and a half break in March, and so I immediately knew I wanted to travel. I immediately knew that, if you buy your plane tickets 8 months in advance, they were going to be much less expensive than if I was going to do it, a month before. And so I just searched. I knew I wanted to go to Europe. I, definitely had my eyes on Paris. I looked at a few different places to travel to, and I ended up finding Paris flights for $350 round trip, which is an amazing deal in my opinion. Probably some of the best ticket pricing I've found in a really long time, and this was great for me because my budget was around $550 US dollars. So this was great, obviously, because I was saving money, but it also allowed me to allocate that money to different types of funds, which is great. So that was the first thing I did. I think I did that all in one night. I looked at flights for a really long time. I knew that I was going to go with another person, and so we ended up buying those tickets together, again, for $350 round trip, obviously with bags and everything included in that, and so that was step one for me. I oftentimes use websites like Expedia, Travelocity, those types of companies as opposed to one specific airline, because they are really good about finding you very specific deals. And so most times I will take two different airlines there and back, and that opens up different time slots for you. It opens up affordable pricing, so on and so forth. Something I would just make sure, if you're going to use websites like that, really pay close attention to bags and the pricing on that, if you can choose your seat, if you can't choose your seat, so on and so forth, because different airlines obviously have different policies about, carry-ons and checking bags and so on and so forth. And so I usually find that using websites like that end up saving me money as opposed to not saving me money. So then once I bought those tickets, I decided that I wanted to stay in an Airbnb because I was staying with another person, and so together we started to look for Airbnbs, and this was, some time apart. I think it's perfectly okay to not have your whole trip planned in, a day. After we bought our flights, we spent a long time on Airbnb, really trying to find the right place for us. And again, if you remember early in the episode, I, really wanted to look for something within a close proximity to the things I wanted to do. So in particular, I wanted to be close to the Eiffel Tower, and I wanted to be close to the city center. And as, two women, there are lots of different options for places to stay, but we knew that we wanted Airbnb. We wanted to feel like we had a home for, the week that we were going to be there. We wanted to make sure that, we felt safe and we felt like we were in a good area. I typically tend to look for, an apartment building or something that's on a second floor, something like that, to make me feel, really safe and really at home. And so we began looking at Airbnb in different price ranges, and this, again, was for a really long time, and for a while we were trying to do it back and forth virtually, and then I realized the most efficient way to do it if you're traveling with another person or multiple people, just schedule a time that you can carve out an hour together. And if you actually look together, just sitting down at one computer, this is actually going to end up being much more efficient. You guys will both end up getting something that you really want, because, you know, people do have different expectations and different things that they're interested in. And so, like I said, if you can sit down with the person you're going with, it's going to be much more efficient. And so we ended up, I'm really happy with what we ended up with, which was a really cute apartment. Again, we looked for something that had a kitchen, something that had a washer and dryer, something that was in close proximity to where we wanted to be, and it ended up being $85 a night, and that was for 5 nights. And you got to add in, you know, a cleaning fee, a service fee, so on and so forth. And so our total was about $520 for 5 nights for both of us, which, you know, per person, that is about $50 per person, which usually, you know, I was shooting for, you know, the $30 and $40 range, but as I mentioned, I ended up getting those flights for much cheaper than my original budget. And when you incorporate things like it having a kitchen, being close to where we wanted to be, you know, that extra $10 a day is looking a lot more doable, especially when you consider those options. And so that was kind of, you know, those really far in advance things that we decided to get done right away, very far before the trip. And so those were the basics, and now we're going to move into kind of more of the day-to-day. So something else that it is important to look at, and, you know, when you are planning a trip, look at the times that your flights are. When you're going abroad, so you're going to a place where the time zones are going to be a lot different, trying to get flights that kind of line up with that is really helpful. So our flight gets in at 9:30 p.m. In, you know, France, Paris time. And so that was perfect for us because we're going to be exhausted after our day of traveling, and, you know, we'll have enough time to get to an Airbnb, no problem getting a taxi, but then we can also go right to bed and hopefully avoid some of that jet lag when we wake up in the morning. And so when we wake up in the morning, we will have 5 full days. And, you know, this is actually a lot of time for one city. I think cities, you know, can be done, you know, it really depends. A big city like Paris definitely can be done in 5 days, but it gives us a lot of time for leisure and a lot of movement, which is, again, as someone who doesn't like to plan every single thing, something that I'm really looking forward to. But kind of to compensate for the fact that we have a long time, I really wanted to get a list of the things that I really wanted to do, and now, you know, once you have your list, so things like going to the Notre Dame Cathedral, going to the Louvre, the Eiffel Tower, Moulin Rouge, Sacred Heart Basilica, the Public Gardens, a few different museums, and of course, we want to incorporate a big shopping day. And so kind of making that list of what you want to do really is going to lead us into exactly how we are going to plan that trip. And so there's a website, it's called US News Travel, and it has the 25 best things to do in Paris, but this website has, you know, the 25 best things to do in a lot of different cities. And something that I really like about this website, and I've used it a lot, is it actually has a mile proximity to the city center. And so it shows you how far away everything is in proximity to, you know, the center of the city, which is really awesome. And so what I like to do at this time, you know, when I've looked at the things I want to do, I pull out an old-fashioned map, which seems kind of ridiculous. I feel like maps aren't used very often anymore, but pulling out a map and actually physically looking at where the things you want to do and where they are in proximity to each other, finding out what's close to one another, what's really far, what it's going to cost you, you know, a taxi ride, what can you walk to from where you're staying. That really helps. And so, you know, my plan for this trip is to kind of structure something really big every single day and then allow movement and time and, you know, incorporate how I'm feeling. Am I tired that day? Do I want to sleep in? Do I want to get up early? You know, am I going to go out at night? Am I going to go to a club? Is that, you know, do I want to wake up at 7 the next morning? Do I want to sleep in? Kind of incorporating these things into, you know, giving yourself room to relax and giving yourself room to change your mind and do different things, is, I have found, really beneficial and kind of makes for, it allows you to have some longevity throughout your trip. Traveling can be absolutely exhausting, and I think allowing yourself, time to breathe and time to reevaluate is crucial when you're traveling. So, what we are going to do after the break is we're now going to kind of go live in terms of looking at something together. So I'm going to pull up an old-fashioned map of Paris. I'm going to look at, what is in close proximity together. We're going to talk about it more in terms of how I would, want to specifically, plan this exact trip. And hopefully, again, this is, hopefully this can help you guys plan or get an idea of how you would start to kind of tackle this huge task, which is, planning your trip and finding out exactly what you want to do. And that is going to happen right after the break.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
We are back from a break. I have pulled up a map of Paris, and something about international travel is sometimes it can be really overwhelming to look at maps and streets that you're really unfamiliar with, especially if they're in a language that is not familiar to you. And so I always try to look for an English map, or I try to look with something that has really good visuals, so on and so forth. And so I've pulled up a map of Paris in general. And, what I see is that most stuff that I'm interested in is in close proximity to one another, which is really awesome. And, kind of looking more closely at it, I know that my apartment, that the Airbnb that I have booked is really close to the Eiffel Tower, which is great. And so when I'm looking at that, I'm going to think, okay, so the Eiffel Tower just about is going to be kind of my central main point that I am going to base all of my travels after. And so another thing that you want to consider is looking at public transportation. If you are, realistically in a city that you don't speak the language in, is public transportation something that you want to deal with? Or, am I going to want to Uber or taxi, so on and so forth? And so for instance, I mentioned I really want to use some museums. When I am looking at this map, I see that the Louvre and the Ossuary and the Ardennes Museum are all in really close proximity to each other, and so maybe that is something that I want to tackle in one day. If we are looking a little farther out, I notice that I am a huge history nerd, and I am a huge I don't know how to put this. I am really interested in lore and folklore, and I know that the catacombs are a lot farther outside of the city, and this is something that I would absolutely love to do. And so this is something that maybe one day I'm going to go shopping in the morning, and then I'm going to want to go to the catacombs at night. And so that is what I'm going to write down for one of my days. Maybe this is going to want to be closer to the end when, me and the girl that I'm traveling with, we're a little more tired. Maybe this is, on day 4, we're going to want to sleep in. We're going to want to have our shopping day. We've saved money at this point. We are going to go shopping in the day. We're going to go to the catacombs in the afternoon. We're going to come back and make a great meal at night. That is an perfectly okay way to plan just one of your days. Something else that's really important to consider is look at different districts, right? So, for example, the Latin Quarter is a part of Paris that I really want to see, and that is something that, I'm not going to plan an exact specific thing to go to, but if I want to go to, the Latin Quarter as just if I want to go to the Latin Quarter, and get a taxi there and, allow myself to explore what that looks like as an activity, that's completely fine. It is an area of Paris with, street vendors and coffee shops and different, art exhibits and galleries and, a place that you really can just walk around, and that could be your activity for the entire day. And if that's a way that you're trying to save money, then that's amazing, and that is totally something you can do. So the point of this is really to just understand that getting a lay of the land and getting an idea of what your city or what your country or wherever you're going is going to look like is really important. And also being very familiar with where you are staying in your location. It's also going to help you in terms of, orienting where you want to go, where you're coming from, and where you're going. And so that is primarily, the way that I'm going to break down my trip to Paris in particular. So something else that I think is important to consider is the way that you spend your money and what exactly you want to spend it on. So I think considering, when the next time I'm going to be in Paris is, and what specific activities can I only do in Paris? And so I know for a lot of people, shopping is something that, why would you shop in, a foreign country when you can shop at home? For me, I love fashion, I love shopping, I love collecting clothes from different countries. This is something that is completely unique to me and something that I wouldn't want to miss out on. Or I like to see art from all around the world, and I know that, going to the Louvre or going to different museums is going to be an experience that I cannot get anywhere else. And so I think kind of considering, what is unique to that city, what is unique to Paris, maybe I don't want to go to a zoo or an aquarium or a public park because these are things that I can access and these are things that I can get, in my hometown. But, some people might feel differently about that. And so I think really thinking about what is unique to you, what is special to you, what do you care about, and what do you feel like you can only get when you are, spending money to be in Paris or in Prague or in Pennsylvania or, really wherever you are going. Really think about just, what type of experience you want to get and, plan your day around that, plan your trip around that, plan your articles of clothing around that, plan your budget around that. And in terms of budget, just one last thing I want to say before we move on to an entirely different topic is something that I like to do is save your money and be able to splurge on one, big ticket item or one big ticket experience that is really going to make your trip. And I think this is something that even when I haven't had a lot of money to allocate, I always try to make sure that I save money to do this. And, that could be, going on a boat ride around the city or, if that is shopping for you, maybe that's what it is. Or, taking a tour in a museum or, paying for a really nice dinner, paying to go see a show. That is something that I'm not particularly interested in theater, but I've gotten some opportunities to see theaters in, performance in different cultures, and that is something that I think is completely invaluable and something that is completely worth it. And again, when you're looking for things that you cannot get in the US or in, your area of the country, I mean, what is more unique than art, and what is more unique than theater and kind of music and things like that. I think even though they might be more expensive, to me is so worth it because it's so unique. It'll never happen again. It's kind of that unique experience. And so allocating money, one night or one day to do something that, maybe is a little bit more expensive, but it's a completely unique experience. At least in my opinion, is completely worth it. Maybe it's not to you. But in my experience, that has been what has made my trips have been those very individual, very specific activities that are maybe a little more catered towards you. And so if you are a musician, if you are an artist, if you are an economist or a historian or whatever it may be, don't be afraid to seek out experiences that are special and meaningful or important to you, or on the other hand, an experience that you never would usually do or never would usually experience. If you're in a different culture, try different food, try different activities, try different types of alcohol. I don't know, do really whatever you have interest in doing, or whatever sparks kind of that joy within you when you travel. And in my opinion, this is really just the best part of travel. And as I have traveled more and more throughout my lifetime, I realized that these are what I am seeking when I am planning my trip. And sometimes these are the things that happen when I don't plan my trip. And these are the random little things that you never thought would happen, can sometimes be the best part of your trip. And so, yes, that is contradictory, but I think that is just what travel is like. And that's what I love so much about it. And so we'll have more about travel when I come back from the break. And so stay tuned.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Break. During this episode, I have talked to you about how I am a completely scatterbrained, oftentimes forgetful human being who loves to travel, and I walked you through some of the ways that I try to stay on top of my traveling and how I try to stay organized, how I try to stay on budget, so on and so forth. I talked to you about how to plan a trip start to finish. I walked you through how I am currently planning my trip to Paris in the spring and how you can do something like that too, and how all you have to do is kind of, start little, start broad, and it becomes easier and easier. And to close the show, I, often like to bring a sort of historical aspect. I like to talk about something really specific at the end of the show. Sometimes it's a story, sometimes it's a fact, and today I'm going to talk to you about the Louvre, which is a very popular tourist destination in Paris and in France in general and in Europe in general. It is the world's largest art museum, which I certainly did not know before exploring this. I think that's insane. I am so excited to go. I've heard so many good things about it. It's a very historic monument in Paris, and it truly is a central landmark of the city. Everyone knows where it is. Everyone knows what it is. There are approximately 38,000 objects from prehistory to the 21st century that are exhibited, and over 72,000 square meters, which is 782,910 square feet, which is insane. That is so massive. And in 2019, just to give you guys kind of an idea of just how popular it is, the Louvre received 9.6 million visitors, which is hard to even imagine. And, something that I heard about in the news as an American, and something I have not heard about since, was the fire that actually happened at the Louvre. And so I wanted to do some research into it and understand kind of what happened. And to what my understanding from my research is that it kind of social media made it out to be a much bigger deal than it actually was, which, can happen a lot, especially with social media and international news, and hearing that the Louvre is on fire is absolutely terrifying. But apparently it was actually much smaller than it was made out to be. However, something that I think is so interesting, and I always find this interesting with like kind of things that have maybe religious ties or old ties or historic ties, there were actually floods that were going on in Paris that affected the Louvre just days before this fire that broke out happened, which is, very interesting. And apparently the fire actually broke out on the street adjacent to the Louvre, but it was, really in the news because there was huge smoke coming up over the Louvre. There were so many pictures taken, and so actually when the fire erupted, the museum was still closed because, as I mentioned, that there were floods, and it was close to protect the artworks from any water damage from all of the floods that had been going on. And basically what happened is like the trash outside of the Louvre caught on fire, and no one was injured, which is good, and Paris's fire department was able to kind of tame the fire very quickly and efficiently, but it did kind of cause this dramatic cloud of black smoke that happened over the Louvre, and all of Paris could see it, and that is kind of, as I believe, what stirred up so much news and kind of hubbub about this. And I feel like I heard about it everywhere, and everyone was posting about it on their, Instagram stories. And it actually, like I said, the fire happened on June 6th, and then the Louvre reopened on June 8th. So, the staff kind of had to ensure that the artwork was fine from the flooding and fine from the fire, but it actually ended up being okay. And for some reason, I kind of had it in my head that like something absolutely terrible happened and that there was a huge tragedy, when in reality, I think it was, quite a tame fire. And so that was something that I was interested in. Maybe you'd be interested in it. And, before we end our show, I always like to do this. I'm gonna give you guys some interesting facts that I found out about the Louvre to close out our show. And so the first is that before the Louvre was a museum, it actually started out in the 12th century as a fortress. And that was from King Philip II. So, and that was the first person to be known as the King of France, actually. And he was one of, Europe's most successful rulers in the medieval time. And it actually was a defensive outpost at the time. And that's because it's on the western border of Paris. And so along the bank of a big river. And so that's when it was originally created. It was designed to prevent invasions from the north. And it had an arsenal that had, definitely a huge arsenal, and it had a moat and a big tower, and so that's where it started out as. And, however, as, the city, grew bigger and bigger, it, pretty much became a moot point. It no longer protected all of the city, and so, it then, was a royal residence, which I think is really interesting. That's the second fact that I thought was really fascinating. So Charles V modified it from its original design essentially into a big palace. And so that is something that I thought was kind of interesting to go, right from this huge, big fortress to kind of this royal palace. But, as through time, it is such an old building, it's kind of fascinating how many different kind of hats that it's worn. It actually was at one point completely abandoned, and it was rotting away for a long time, which is so fascinating because we know what it is now. And so it actually didn't reopen until 1789, which is just fascinating to me. And something else that I found out is that the Mona Lisa, which is kind of, what the Louvre is really known for, its most famous painting, actually hadn't always been on display at the Louvre, which is something else that I thought was really, really interesting. And we also know that in 1911, the Mona Lisa was stolen off the wall of the museum by an Italian criminal who claimed his motive was that the painting was supposed to be taken back to Leonardo da Vinci's native land, which is really interesting. And so it literally the Louvre had a vacant spot on the wall for years where the painting had been, and then it only got returned 2 years later. And I think that was really interesting. And actually, something else that I didn't know is it stayed on the wall for another 50 years before it got stolen, and then the First Lady, Jackie Kennedy, convinced French officials to allow the painting to tour museums in New York and Washington for popular events. And so that was pretty much the only time that has happened. I thought that was really fascinating. And something else that is kind of classic, and in terms of history, Napoleon Bonaparte temporarily renamed the Louvre after himself, which seems in his personality, but I thought that was interesting. And then the number 6 facts that I learned, and this is coming right off of a website. It says the Louvre became a clearinghouse for artwork stolen by the Nazis during World War II. So 130 years after Napoleon Bonaparte named the museum after himself, what happened is the Louvre began to prepare an evacuation of tens of thousands of pieces of art, basically to try to, protect the art as best as possible. And after the German occupation of Paris, the Nazi officials were ordered to reopen the Louvre after it had been closed kind of during World War II, which is really interesting. And so literally at one point in time, the Louvre had bare walls and empty corridors and so on and so forth, which literally some of the art that got taken out of there, it said the art that remained had to be covered up by heavy burlap bags, which is just a really interesting piece of art. And of course, it eventually was, put back to its normal art after World War II, and a lot of it had been repaired and replaced and so on and so forth. And so that is very an interesting piece of information. And so yeah, that is the information that I conjured up on the Louvre, something really fascinating, something that I will definitely learn more about in my travels, and that is pretty much all I have today. If you enjoyed this episode, please like our podcast. If you can leave a review, that's amazing. You can check us out on Instagram and Facebook, and of course Twitter, and that's at the GSMC Travel Podcast. That is all I have for you today. My name is Emily. Thank you so much for listening, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From travel to health and wellness to entertainment and life and happiness to sex and relationships. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast.